Hello and welcome to Mr. Manley History Teacher's latest video on a recap of Topic 2, Germany from 1890 to 1945. In this video we're going to discuss some of the main points and the main events that took place in Germany between the start of the Wall Street crash and the Great Depression right up until Hitler becoming Fuhrer of Germany. So let's start off by looking at the events of the Wall Street crash and the consequences of that leading into the Great Depression. So in October 1929, the Wall Street crash on the US stock exchange brought about a global economic depression. So it was a depression that affected the whole world, or many countries around the world, not just Germany. Now, in Europe, Germany was one of the worst affected countries because American banks called in all of their loans at very short notice. These loans had been agreed under the Dawes Plan, and in the bottom right-hand corner, you can see here the Dawes Plan in action, whereby the USA would lend money to Germany, Germany would pay reparations to Britain and France as a consequence of the Treaty of Versailles, and then Great Britain and France would pay the money back to the United States. However, because of the Wall Street crash, America recalled the loans to Germany. Now, after hyperinflation, the Dawes Plan had been arranged. The loans funded German industry as well as paying back the reparations to Britain and France. And without these loans going to Germany, industry collapsed and depression in Germany began. The most obvious consequence of this collapse was a massive rise in unemployment. Over the winter of 1929 and 1930, the number of unemployed rose from 1.4 million to over 2 million Germans. And by the time Hitler became Chancellor in January 1933, an incredible 1 in 3 Germans were unemployed. And eventually the figure hit 6.1 million in 1933 and 1934. In that same period, between 1929 and 1933, industrial production had halved because there were so few workers working in factories and manufacturing. So, in what ways were the lives of Germans affected by the Depression? So the US couldn't buy German goods, so factories closed, people lost jobs, as we mentioned already, over 6 million unemployed by 1934. The US banks asked for a return of the loans. There was price fixing to protect farmers, and it made food too expensive. 17 million Germans claimed unemployment benefit, and probably most significantly, there was a rise in extremism. So as well as an increase in support for the Nazis, there was an increase in support for the communists, and the Nazis promised to solve Germany's problems by getting people back to work and solving the unemployment problem and ensuring that people had bread or wages to buy food. So that's how the Nazis appealed to the people in Germany and people of Germany during the Great Depression. Now, it wasn't just the Depression itself that led to the Nazis' rise in popularity. There was mass propaganda being produced by Joseph Goebbels, and politically, Hitler was quite shrewd and calculating in gaining support from the German people as well. So in April of 1932, there was a presidential election. Hitler came second to the standing president, Hindenburg. So Hindenburg got 53% of the vote, Hitler achieved 36.8% of the vote. Now, the Chancellor in May 1932 was a man called Brüning. He resigned, and the President Hindenburg appointed Franz von Papen as the new Chancellor. Then here, as you can see, we've got the July 1932 elections, and the Nazis became the largest single party with 37.3% of the vote, or 230 seats. But this wasn't enough for Hitler to be made, this wasn't still enough for the Nazis to become the largest party. Hitler demanded to be made Chancellor, but von Papen remained. Hindenburg didn't really like Hitler on a personal level. He saw him as a bit of an upstart. Hindenburg had been a general of the German army during the First World War, and he saw Hitler as a threat to the establishment in Germany at the time. So he didn't like him on a personal level. Then in November 1932, new elections were called by von Papen to try and win a majority. The Nazis actually lost 34 seats, and Hitler was really disappointed with these results, but they still remained the largest party with 196 seats. Now, because von Papen's party didn't gain many seats or many votes, his Conservative Party still wasn't very popular. Hindenburg appointed an army general called Kurt von Schleicher as Chancellor. Von Schleicher tried to split the Nazis by asking a leading Nazi called Gregor Strasser to become his vice-chancellor, but Hitler forced Strasser to decline. Then in January 1933, von Papen and Hindenburg, they turned to Hitler. They believed that they could appoint him as chancellor with von Papen as vice-chancellor and still be able to control him and do what they wanted to Germany. However, events after this, after January 1933, would prove that actually Hitler was able to manipulate situations so he could actually do what he wanted to. Now, Hitler, as I mentioned on the previous slide, he was appointed Chancellor in January 1933, but he couldn't do what he wanted to. He still owed his job to Hindenburg, who could sack him at any point. Like I mentioned already, Hindenburg was suspicious of Hitler. He didn't like him, and other members of the elite in Germany, so the aristocracy and the very wealthy, they didn't trust Hitler either. Germany was also still a democracy at this time when Hitler became Chancellor, and he could only make laws if the Reichstag approved. Hitler lacked a majority. The Nazis were the single party, but they didn't have over 50% of the vote, so Hitler couldn't do what he wanted to. And actually, there'd been a decline in popularity towards the Nazis between July 1932 and November 1932, so Hitler knew that he had to act quickly in order to secure his position in power. Now, after Hitler secured his position in March 1933, there was the Reichstag fire. This led to the Communist Party being banned and a general climate of fear going around Germany of the Nazis' power. And also there was, as a consequence of the Reichstag fire, the Enabling Act was passed, which essentially allowed Hitler to pass any laws that he wanted to without consulting the Reichstag. So essentially, the Enabling Act allows Hitler to pass any laws he wants to. Now, even though Hitler's now established power and he's secure in terms of opposition from outside of the Nazi Party, there was still opposition from within the Nazi Party itself by 1934. And the main opposition towards the Nazis wasn't from the communists anymore. They've been banned after the Reichstag fire and the Enabling Act. It wasn't from other political parties. They'd been banned after the Enabling Act as well. It wasn't from Hitler's private bodyguard, the SS. They swore an oath of loyalty to Hitler, so they were no longer a threat. It was actually really from these two organisations that we've got left on the screen now. We've got the German army and the brown shirts. Now, the leader of the brown shirts was a man called Ernst Röhm, and he demanded that the Nazi Party carry its socialist agenda, because as well as being a racist anti-Semitic party, the Nazi Party still, by the early 1930s, had some more left-wing socialist policies in place. And Ernst Röhm really liked these socialist left-wing policies as well. And he wanted the brown shirts to replace the German army. So the army really didn't trust the brown shirts and Ernst Röhm. So Hitler had a decision to make by the summer of 1934. He could either back the German army and get rid of the brown shirts with the SA, or he could back the brown shirts and use them to replace the German army. And in the end, he chose to support and back the German army against the brown shirts. So on the 30th of June, 1934, many of the leading brown shirt members, like Ernst Röhm, they were killed and executed at the hands of the SS, Hitler's private bodyguards organisation. So around 400 leading members of the Brown Shirts, or the SA, were killed, as well as other opponents like the previous Chancellor von Schleicher. And this destroyed all opposition to Hitler within the Nazi Party, and it gave power to the SS instead of the Brown Shirts. And it also really showed the rest of the world what a tyrant Hitler had become. And so as a consequence of this, there was now no longer internal opposition to Hitler. That's really important. So after the Night of the Long Knives, very soon after this, on the 19th of August 1934, President Hindenburg dies, the last obstacle to Hitler achieving absolute power. And almost immediately, Hitler combines the position of President and Chancellor together and calls this position the Fuhrer. So Hitler is now not only President and not only Chancellor, he's also head of the army. He makes the army swear an oath of personal allegiance to him, not to Germany anymore. And Hitler also had extended his power in other ways. So he had reorganized a local government. He'd put leading Nazi party officials in charge of each area of Germany, known as Gauleiters. Trade unions were abolished and their leaders had been arrested. An agreement was signed with the Pope, which allowed Hitler to increase his power in Germany without opposition from the Catholic Church, as long as he left the church, particularly the church schools, Catholic schools, alone. And Hitler set up the Nazis' People Courts, where judges had to swear an oath of loyalty to the Nazis, similar to the oath of loyalty the army had to swear as well. And by the autumn of 1934, Hitler was in complete control of Germany. I hope you enjoyed this video. Click on the like button and give my channel, Mr. Manny History Teacher, a subscribe.